Oklahoma is the land of second, third, and last chances. Who were the people that made it so? The Red River Institute of History, johnjdwyer.com, me, Gwen Falconer Lippert, and our signature sponsor, Atwood's Stores, present Oklahoma Gold. Together with our Will Rogers Medallion-winning author-historian John J. Dwyer, we'll stitch the golden threads of Oklahoma history. It's Oklahoma Gold. Dignifying our history by the stories we celebrate. The day Woody discovered the Sooners? John J. Dwyer. Let's relive this great story.
Well, Gwen, indeed, one of the most important elements of Oklahoma history, whether we want to admit it or not, and one which we have often visited on this program, Oklahoma Gold, is sports. By any measure, the state's accomplishments on athletic fields and courts of play is way outsized considering our relatively small population in comparison with other states in the Union. Great, even iconic Oklahoma teams, players, coaches, and programs have brought us thrills, inspiration, and yes, heartbreak that run from generation to generation through our family histories, just as they do state history. Sports have been a uniting bond across social, economic, political, racial, and ethnic lines that many pastors would envy for their churches, generals for their armies, and mayors for their communities. They provided the opportunity for countless young Oklahomans to develop character attributes, not least determination and resilience, through the crucibles of pain, adversity, disappointment, and sacrifice that have helped forge them into leaders of our towns, our state, and our nation. And not infrequently, Gwen, they've inspired those young people and the older people they grow into with feats of daring, glory, and selflessness that every now and then melt away that curtain between fact and fiction and show that on game day, truly anything is possible, and in real life too. Perhaps that elusive moment of perfection when the stars for once all align in their courses, it all works as it's supposed to, even maybe especially when all hope seemed lost, is what keeps us playing, Gwen, or cheering. Such a day was one you and I both remember, Columbus Day, September 24th, 1977. As you said, the day Woody Hayes discovered the Sooners. Any of y'all remember it that are listening? It seemed like half the state of Oklahoma plastered that bumper sticker on their vehicle at the beginning of the summer of 1977. I did too on my old 1968 327 Chevy Malibu 4-barrel V8. It was a loud one too. It was the summer before my senior year at OU, and we didn't have social media, cell phones, 1,000 TV channels, and so many other entertainment options like we have now. Our school, the Oklahoma Sooners, had won 2 national football championships in the previous 3 years, though we had never played the Ohio State Buckeyes, nor their legendary coach, Woody Hayes, but we were going to in their house on September 24th. And looking back now, I can see why Woody told his team in their locker room before the game that they were upholding the honor not only of their team and school, but their entire conference, the Big Ten, against a team like us. Our coach, Barry Switzer, was a swashbuckling riverboat gambler, figuratively and literally, whose father was murdered and whose mother committed suicide and died in his arms when he was 17. Later, his New York Times best-selling autobiography would be named Bootlegger's Boy, and he was a generation younger than old school Woody. I played basketball with or against many of the guys on our team in high school or college or both, and hung out with a lot of them. Most were good old boys, never meaning no harm, rakes and ramblers, many with fun-loving habits for which the chickens would come home to roost in later years. But I never heard of one of them who committed a mean-spirited act or physically hurt anyone off the field. What acts they may have committed that today might be considered felonies, well, back then, as my Duncan friend, retired Judge Joe Enos says, were likely considered pranks. Anyhow, most of us have been looking forward to this OU-Ohio State game, not just all summer, but the entire time we have been at OU. I don't know if that's how it is now at the school, but that's how it was back then. And so 22 of us Delta Tau Delta fraternity boys convoyed north and east for the big game, my old Chevy Malibu in the Vanguard. Amidst much schoolboy fun and revelry, a few of us visited the OU team hotel Thursday afternoon before the game to say hi to our buddy, Sooner quarterback Dean Blevins. Now imagine some of you listeners remember Dean back in his playing days at OU, as well as perhaps as the greatest athlete perhaps in Norman high school history. And many of you know him as the longtime Emmy Award-winning sports anchor for Oklahoma City's KWTV News 9. Well, we finally caught up with Dean, not Thursday, not Friday, but at the hotel, the team hotel, the Saturday morning, just before the team got on the bus to head to the stadium to play Ohio State. Right before we did, as we walked through the hotel bar toward the bus, we spotted a couple of OU's assistant coaches downing beverages on the rocks that did not appear to be Cokes. Those fellows seemed tense and like they needed their own brand of energy drink. When we found Dean wearing his white letter sweater with the crimson O on it and carrying his bag and getting ready to step on the bus, I wished him good luck. He looked at me forlornly and said, I probably won't even get to play today. Well, back then, OU students got to the game way early and stayed until the end. As I said, we didn't have all the fancy entertainment options, and most of us had no fancy girls awaiting us either. I was reminded in YouTubing the game recently that in addition to the other contraband we lugged into it, nearly all of us had horns. Those long-necked, hard plastic sort of horns that everybody but the one blowing it gets sick of hearing real quick. I guess they didn't have stadium rules against those back then either, because we blew the doors off those things all day long. If you watch that game on YouTube, you'll know I speak the truth about this. And Gwen, after the break, we'll talk about the memorable events that occurred that day in the Horseshoe at the Ohio State University.
So are we going to get a kick out of this story?
I think there might be a real kick, especially for Oklahoma folks, in looking back on that game.
And did Dean Blevins get to play?
Well, Dean actually did get to play that day, and it was a great story. I don't want to spoil that part of it for the listeners. But Gwen, do you remember where you were that day? I know you were not that long before riding shotgun on the Roughneck schooner before the game of the century against Nebraska. Another program, by the way, listeners, that we have in our catalog.
I was a college graduate, probably fishing at Lake Texoma, but watching the game on TV.
One of the most famous in college football history, and perhaps the most famous single play in the long, storied tradition of Oklahoma Sooner football.
The kick was immortalized in fine art. Who was the artist?
Probably the most famous sports artist in American history, Leroy Neiman.
And there it is, the kick.
The day Woody discovered the Sooners, September 24th, 1977, maybe the greatest, most thrilling comeback in OU football history.
I can hardly wait to hear the golden nugget. This is Oklahoma Gold. Dignifying our history with the story we get to relive today. John J. Dwyer, tell me about the kick.
Well, it was, as we discussed before the break, Gwen, Columbus Day, September 24th, 1977, the day Woody discovered the Sooners. Woody Hayes, the iconic Ohio State football coach, and it was the legendary OU Ohio State football game, and I was there. It was the first time I'd ever been in a stadium that shook like an earthquake when the home crowd got fired up. And that is what happened when their band came onto the field before the game and did that march where they dot the I on Ohio at the end. And did I mention it was the nationally televised game of the week, back when there was exactly one of those on Saturday. And they, the Buckeyes, were ranked number 3 in the country, and we, the Sooners, were ranked number 4. The sun never peeked out that day, and it rained through a big part of the game. And it was like no other game I'd ever seen before or since. And like I said, as I'm speaking this, it's been 46 years. You could tell these people hated us for some reason, which we loved, especially when our team came out of the gate beating the stuffing out of them. Before you knew it, we were up 20-0. But then our key skill players started going down with injuries, including Thomas Lott, perhaps the greatest running quarterback in OU history, fullback Kenny King, who would be an All-Pro and Super Bowl champion with the Raiders for several years, and tailback Billy Sims, who won the Heisman Trophy the next season. And by the fourth quarter, these rude Yankees were up 28-20 on us. Ohio Stadium shaking the most it did all day when they got the lead in the second half, and their band started cranking Hang On Sloopy. ABC play-by-play announcer Keith Whoa Nelly Jackson, one of our band of Delt brothers, arriving at the stadium just before kickoff after lodging at the Columbus jail the night before, when the arresting officer did not appreciate him identifying himself as Mr. Boomer Sooner when he was called upon. And then your fellow Ardmore native Sharon Jester Turney, a sweet and funny Palm girl who grew up on a ranch near that town in southern Oklahoma, then became the longtime CEO of Victoria's Secret. And by the way, if you watch the video of the game, she is the blonde on the sidelines that the ABC cameramen rather seemed to favor. And what do you know? Dean Blevins, that other quarterback, and long since a TV sportscasting star who was temporarily a third stringer that day, while old Dino wound up pulling out some Sooner magic with the deck stacked against us versus the Buckeyes, like he did against number 1 ranked Nebraska the year before. He led the Sooners down the field on 2 epic drives in the closing minutes, tricking the Buckeyes into jumping off sides with quick snap counts, throwing laser-like passes, and quarterbacking his team with steely calm while on national TV in a stadium so loud that none of his teammates could hear a word he said. And German-born field goal kicker Uwe von Schamann, whom fame and legend never changed, and who would always ask me when he walked into a Norman establishment, "Do you know if they have deer beer here?" Who else would have thought to lead 90,000 Ohio State fans as they screamed, block that kick, on the next to last play of the game, when he was the fella getting ready to try a 41-yard field goal into the wind with 6 seconds left and us down by 2 points, and Hang On Sloopy rocking the stadium. Yes, as some of us know by now, that was indeed, Gwen, the kick. The kick. One of the most famous in college football history, and perhaps the most famous single play in the long, storied tradition of Oklahoma Sooner football. So do you remember where you were when that happened, Gwen? Were you just pulling in a bass?
I was TV side, watching and holding my breath and singing do 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 do.
You weren't singing Hang On Sloopy, were you?
Not me. But Uwe, I remember this like it was yesterday. He put his hands up and conducted the crowd as though they were an orchestra.
That's right.
And then got down to business.
He did. And you can see that conducting a portion of it, not the whole thing, but a portion of that. The camera managed to catch it. And you can catch that on the YouTube of this epic 77 game between OU and Ohio State. Well, indeed, as we said at the outset today, every so often, the stars indeed align in their courses. A happy few band of brothers or sisters takes the field and accomplishes feats that they will remember all their remaining days, and some of us will too. And the rest of us will be renewed in our flagging faith that on game day, if one has prepared himself for that chance which may or may not ever come, anything is possible. And if it's possible on that field or court, then maybe, just maybe, it might be so elsewhere in our so often weary lives.
Final score?
Ohio State 28, Oklahoma 29.
Sooner magic. Now that's Oklahoma gold.